For decades, your presence has been the quiet hum behind the world's loudest stages. You've been dismissed as a background extra in life's grand production, while others, some with only a fraction of your depth, soaked up the spotlight. But destiny was never in a rush with you. It was composing something monumental, a script that would make every earlier act look like rehearsal. Now, even figures like Elon Musk, men who are accustomed to steering the future's headlines, can't stop referencing the brilliance that's about to break free in you. And it's not because you've suddenly changed, it's because the timing has. The same divine intelligence that let you gather wisdom in the shadows has decided the curtain must finally rise. Musk may speak in terms of rockets, markets, and Mars, but beneath it all, he's echoing a cosmic truth. The Real launch is yours. While others memorized lines from borrowed scripts, you learned to write your own. While they sought applause, you sought understanding. And in that holy stillness, between disappointments and small, quiet victories, you forged a strength that doesn't need to announce itself. Now, you emerge not to compete with the shallow shows of the past, but to change the genre entirely. Elon can sense it. Heaven already knows it. The chosen ones are stepping forward, not as actors in someone else's play, but as the architects of the next act in human history. And you, after years of preparation, are finally about to perform the role only you were ever meant to play. There was no consequence for the delay. It was a divine plan. Before releasing you into a world in dire need of anything tangible, heaven required you completely loaded. Now, when people who counted you out begin to experience an unexplainable change in their confidence, the first tremor of realization starts. The cosmic equation has undergone a profound shift. Additionally, they no longer arrive to the same conclusions from their mental math. They assumed you would stay in the background as they created their empires. However, shadows have a way of showing who they really are. By the time the light source moved, you were no longer in the dark. It was a source of power for you, transforming every setback into preparation for something exceptional and every insult into strength. They're going to learn that each time they attempted to recruit someone to take your place and fill the void left by your absence, the whole production failed. The enthusiasm became stale. The flame in the talks died. The momentum stalled. They were baffled by the fact that their carefully chosen alternatives never quite produced the energy that seemed to follow you around or captured the wonder they recalled. They brought in more gregarious individuals who seemed to fit the role, bigger personalities, and more ostentatious performances. But despite their best efforts, they were never able to replicate your enthusiasm. It didn't land. Because it is impossible to replicate, produce, or mass-produce what you carry. Because they originate from unmanufacturable sources, some presences are impossible to duplicate. You weren't only occupying space. You were the scene's lifeblood, the unsaid glue that kept the dynamic together, and the spark they took for granted. At first, they were unaware of it. They were too preoccupied with attempting to change history, rebrand, or go on without you. However, each effort to replace you just served to emphasize how irreplaceable you were in the first place. The more thoroughly you embrace your own power, the more intense this realization becomes. Every movement you make awakens something primordial in others who see you emerge, sending waves across the collective awareness. This is not the anxious energy of someone who is attempting to establish their worth. This is the serene assurance of a person who has previously shown everything that was important to the only judge whose judgment is always valid. See how your energy causes the atmosphere to reconfigure itself. Entering rooms causes conversations to change in the middle of sentences. People start talking more attentively because your presence awakens their inner connection to truth, not because they are afraid of you. Authenticity naturally creates a contrast that makes anything artificial seem silly, which is why fake confidence starts to wither around you, not because you attack it. This is especially damaging to their well-crafted hierarchies. However, because you are the only one who wasn't pursuing the spotlight, it has been looking for you. Others, meanwhile, were struggling for attention, twisting themselves into incomprehensible forms in an attempt to get a glimpse. What you were doing was revolutionary. You were developing into a very amazing person. You weren't pleading for the limelight. You weren't performing for token approval. In the darkness, you were creating something tangible, gaining solidity as they gained followers. You realized a basic reality that others missed. Therefore, you kept improving your character even while no one was observing, appreciating, or recognizing your development. Their acknowledgement was never a determining factor in your value. For this reason, the light is now frantically searching for you. Because you possess something that cannot be produced, packaged, or duplicated using viral gimmicks and phony self-assurance masquerading as skill. Individuals were making every effort to be seen. You were making every effort to be loyal. You saw life as a holy process of becoming, whereas others saw it as a platform for showcasing oneself. You allowed difficult times to transform you. You didn't flee your peaceful childhood. You leaned closer to them. You didn't make every step public. Silently, you honed your character. Now that someone is genuine enough to endure the intensity of the limelight without being shattered by it, it is circling with predatory precision, not to stroke your ego. They are struck like a freight train by the startling knowledge. You're not leading their shabby production. The genre is being completely rewritten by you. This has nothing to do with seizing a spotlight that was meant to discover you in the first place. Something far more destructive is at play here. You never intended to be the protagonist of someone else's rehashed story. You were never designed to fit within their shabby format, which prioritizes loudness over subtlety and appearance over content. You came to destroy their dependable routines and replace them with something that had real substance, unquestionable purpose, and weight. In an attempt to fit you into categories they were familiar with, they continued attempting to classify you, but nothing stayed. You didn't behave in their manner. You sounded nothing like them. What they were frantically pursuing was not even something you wanted. They were perplexed by this, as individuals are expected to emulate success they see, adhere to tried-and-true methods, and duplicate what has previously been successful. You weren't sent to be familiar, however. It was your mission to be innovative. You were too busy inventing trends to follow them. Because you were creating completely new frameworks, you never cloned formats. It was heavenly alignment, not social media algorithms, that led you to relocate. Your presence, thus, does more than just change the subject of discussion. It changes the meaning of the actual discourse. Their established order is fundamentally disrupted, resulting in the magnificent anarchy that ensues. Their hierarchies were based on the suppositions that the most conspicuous is the most valuable, the loudest is the strongest, and the most pleasing is the most respectable. However, your appearance disproves these formulae. The physics behind your strength is quite different. Character above charm, substance over flair, and depth over volume. And the actual destruction starts here. While you were the most authentic thing on whatever stage they could create, they overacted. They donned masks so effectively that they forgot their own faces behind them, projected personalities, and learned manipulation tactics by heart. However, you arrived as you were. Raw, unadulterated truth, no filter, no facade, no performance art posing as personality. The impact of that presence was greater than any theatrical performance ever could. To make their tales appear more engaging, they embellished them. They pretended to be confident when they weren't. Instead of developing the art of persuasion, they examined it as if it were something that could be downloaded. None of it was real, however. They played loud parts. Yours was strong. They made noise. You were heavy. The terrible irony is that, without even attempting to compete, your genuineness caused them to fade while they spent all of their energy trying to shine via phony methods. You didn't have to perform better than they did. All you had to do was be in the same room. And your inherent presence began to make everything phony seem like amateur theater. When someone doesn't want to be anything other than themselves, others are unsure of how to react. There was no plan, no persona to transform into, and they kept asking what your viewpoint was. And the fact that they couldn't foresee, control, or influence you frightened them more than anything else. As the entire extent of what is occurring becomes evident, the momentum rises to an inevitable crescendo. You arrive to the party on time. The party is you. Without you, the whole performance was lacking, like a symphony without its most important instrument. Every scenario that took place while you were away was just prologue, laying the groundwork for the actual story to start. It wasn't a tactic for you to remain silent over those lengthy seasons. The time was divinely arranged by intelligence that was much more advanced than human planning. You weren't trying to escape attention. You weren't ready for the spotlight. Before the world could understand what true perfection looks like, It had to exhaust itself on subpar alternatives. Before they recognized the nutrients you provide, they had to stuff themselves with empty calories. This fact, however, will rock them to their core. You never remained silent out of fear, weakness, or calculated retreat. It was obedience to God. You were there at all of their productions. They were marking you for something far bigger. You were being prepped by forces they couldn't understand for duties they couldn't fathom at every time you were away from their flimsy spotlights. There won't be any small chat or performance anxiety when you eventually speak. Conviction, clarity, and calling will all be contained in a single, non-repeating voice. Everything it comes into contact with is changed. You can't simply talk to people. Their perception of what true authority sounds like will undergo seismic changes. They will no longer browse their feeds. They will sit more erect. They will sag closer. You're genuine in a manner that breaks through the cacophony of their fake entertainment, not because you're loud. Now, your words have the weight that comes only from being forged in the furnace of true change. Furthermore, what comes out of a soul that has experienced fire is not amusing. Everyone in your frequency range has their latent power awakened. Finally finding its expression, the moment of truth strikes with the power of inevitable fate. Since stealing is removing someone else's property, you don't steal the show. You always had the show. All they were doing was warming your seat. Their intentions aren't disturbed by your appearance. It demonstrates how their plans were always only stand-in tasks until the actual agenda could be finalized. You don't get the limelight. At last, the spotlight finds its mission. You are not accommodated by the stage. At last, the stage fulfills its purpose. Everyone's perception of their own place in the cosmic order is drastically altered by this epiphany. Those who stuck with you throughout the difficult times suddenly recognized that they were making an investment in something far more worthwhile than they had first thought. It dawned on those who disregarded you that they were abandoning precisely what they had been looking for. It's true that flames shaped your character. All they did was pretend to live. The victim narrative, however, stops here, and the conqueror's story starts. You learned to dance with the flames rather than just enduring them. You changed as a result of the strain, not just surviving it. You accomplished more than just survive the night. You found that you are the light they have always been looking for. This is what distinguishes their performance from your misery. Your scars are not ornamental. They are chapters. They have real weight. And that weight is evident in the way you navigate the world and your natural ability to see behind people's facades. Your ability to command respect without asking for it. You went through more than simply difficult circumstances. You were disassembled down to the molecular level and reassembled with materials not found in their surface periodic chart. You lost everything in life. The identity you thought characterized you, the fake support networks you imagined you could depend on, the false beliefs you had about others, and the falsehoods you believed about yourself. The individuals to whom you gave your all not only let you down, but also crushed you. You lost more than just resources. You lost aspects of who you were that you believed were necessary for your survival. Even yet, you put yourself back together to become stronger. Something within of you refused to accept failure as the ultimate solution, not because you had other alternatives. When you most needed to be heard, you were silenced. Dismissed when you merited praise. Undervalued by those whose opinion was never worth having in the first place, and ignored when you outshined everyone in the room. However, none of that devastation was in vain. The fire did more than just burn. It created something indestructible. Your desire for their approval was extinguished. The portions of you that put up with disrespect were burned off. Any version of yourself that accepted less than you deserved was burnt off. A person who has more than just power has risen from the ashes. Someone who embodies power in its most basic form. People are attracted to you now, but they are unable to explain why. It's not your accomplishments, your voice, or your style. It's the depth, the layers, the survival ingrained in your quiet, the clarity that emanates from you. The type of profundity that only genuine pain that has been converted into knowledge can provide. That is what distinguishes you. They didn't go through your flames, but they attempt to mimic your energy. They try to be as confident as you are, but they didn't bear your storms. No one has to be persuaded of your strength. The proof is your very existence. Now that the change is complete, you may fully acknowledge what has always been true. As the entire extent of your impact becomes clear, the momentum keeps increasing. You're altering the collective consciousness, not simply the thoughts of individuals. You're not just encouraging self-improvement. Cultural development is being accelerated by you. Every discussion you join turns into a master lesson in genuine communication. Every project you work on turns into an example of what happens when opportunity and greatness come together. Here's what, however, makes this change so irreversible. Any space you visit is restructured by your presence. You don't just enter places. At the energetic level, you move them. The instant you get there, something basic shifts. Even if they are unable to explain the difference, people nevertheless notice. The mood changes. It tilts. Discussions gain depth. The pretense becomes increasingly awkward. The truth becomes more obtainable. This has nothing to do with control by manipulation or supremacy by force. Since sincerity is so uncommon and potent, it naturally emerges as the most potent force in every setting. You provide the truth, and truth has the annoying tendency to rearrange everything that is based on false information. When you walk in, some folks sit up straighter. They become more mindful of their integrity, more tactful in their speech, and more courteous. Just being around you makes others defensive, avoid eye contact, or grow anxious or agitated. You are not to blame for it. That is how your alignment reveals their misalignment. People are triggered by your presence because you are being yourself, not because you are acting inappropriately. And everything artificial is forced to measure itself against a standard that it was never intended to satisfy. You don't attempt scene stealing. You unintentionally become the scene. This isn't ego. This is the essence. Controlling rooms is not your goal. You're just being authentically yourself when you show up. Everything that is phony, shallow, or unstable either rises to your frequency or retreats to preserve its illusions because of that alone. While you were being ignored, you were also being prepped for something far bigger than anything they could have given you in those early seasons, which is the lovely irony that dances through this realization. They weren't punished for being rejected. It served as defense. It wasn't judgment when they dismissed them. It was providence, ensuring that you are completely mature before taking on duties that call for your entire development. And this is the reality that would make them reevaluate all they thought they knew about success. They weren't attempting to see you. You were developing into something worthwhile to see on your own. You were performing the unseen work, the kind that no one notices, the kind that doesn't trend on social media, the kind that truly matters. While everyone else was promoting themselves, honing their photos, and creating facades of success that seemed impressive on the outside but felt hollow on the inside. You weren't trying to get attention right away. You were heading in the direction of alignment. They want followers. You want nuance. They concentrated on getting noticed. You realized that if you skipped the initial step, everything you produced would become inherently unsustainable, so you concentrated on seeing yourself clearly. You didn't want to feel empty and seem impressive. You wanted to arrive with strength, purpose, and unwavering tranquility. Because of this, people now experience something different when they come into contact with you. They take attention of you. They bear the consequences of someone who skipped the hardship that really shapes character and didn't take any quick cuts or shortcuts. You allow life to mold you. You allow the process to make you humble. You allow hardship to teach you things that YouTube videos and inspirational sayings cannot teach you. No amount of strategic networking or personal branding can replicate, or manufacture the presence that such a trip develops. You weren't dressing up to show off. You were preparing for your future. And today, people are starting to understand the distinction between a successful person and a full person. Some people can't speak. Some people are trembling. Some are set off by the fact that your sheer presence calls into question the whole fake society. The whole economy was based on fictitious influence and superficial achievements. While others were still dressing up, you solidified. You become real in a filter-dependent universe. The cyclical character of your trip becomes stunningly evident as everything reaches its peak. You started this story in the shadows, and now you're going back there, but this time you're their lord instead of their victim. Once seeming to engulf you, the darkness now yields to your control. Your voice thunderously and authoritatively erupts from the hallowed place that was previously a sense of seclusion. The purity of the truth crystallizes. You were never supposed to prove yourself to them. This was about setting yourself up for a future so great that you never needed their understanding, their acceptance, or their permission. They weren't watching you perform for their acclaim. You were growing into a person who could bear the burden of your own destiny. This is the last piece of information that solves this cosmic riddle. They didn't realize you were the moment, so they assumed you missed it. They believed your window had closed after seeing your slowness, stillness, and silent advance. They claimed that you ought to have raised your voice sooner, that the attention had shifted to more eager participants, and that your chance had gone. However, they overlooked the fact that you were never intended to fit into someone else's schedule or hurry to fulfill their fictitious deadlines. Arriving on cue for their convenience was never your intention. Without realizing it, you were the signal and the cue that everything else had been waiting for. You weren't late. You were on course. You were in sync with a beat that is incomprehensible to them, a heavenly timing that isn't hurried by pressure or fright. You didn't arrive to fit into their system, so now that you've emerged, everything else is changing to meet your frequency. You come to completely reset it. You were never made to keep up with their world's pace. You were made to set the pace that their world would eventually learn to keep up with. That's why when you talk today, everything seems different. Doors that were slammed in your face are now opening for this reason. Because they are starting to realize that the event would never be complete without you. Folks who used to disregard you are now pausing mid-conversation when your name is brought up. With the power of utter truth, the last twist is revealed. They weren't attempting to see you. You were developing into something worthwhile to see on your own. The acknowledgement that arises when you finally see yourself fully is always much greater than the confirmation you felt you needed from other sources. Their comprehension was never comprehensive, thus their view of you was never significant. There was never any competition since no one else was ever qualified for your particular role, which is the lovely ending to this cosmic play. They might do background work. They could try out for supporting parts. They might even serve as the stars of their own lesser works. But they could never, ever occupy the space created just for your special blend of talents, life experiences, and vocation. They didn't see you as the unexpected narrative twist. They were too narrow to see that you were the inevitable outcome. It wasn't you who shocked everyone as the underdog. The only thing that delayed your triumph was divine timing. You were the inevitable winner. You had no intention of stealing anything. You were taking back all of it. The performance doesn't start yet. With the arrival of its main character, the show suddenly makes sense. You realize that everything that has occurred to you has been preparing you for everything that is going to happen through you as you stand in this moment of total realization. Development, not rejection, was the cause of the delay. Refinement, not rejection, was the opposition. The darkness served as preparation rather than punishment. This last fact, however, will alter your perspective on your adventure permanently. Even if you're finally ready, the show doesn't begin. It is beginning because they are at last. For years, you've been prepared. While others were seeking external approval, you were working within. Despite the temptation to take shortcuts, you chose integrity. You were gaining the ability to stand by yourself without resentment. How to get up without having any. How to be powerful without being soulless. However, preparedness was insufficient. It was never about you alone when you emerged. It was about preparing the mass mentality for someone they couldn't purchase, control, or influence. Systems based on deceit are threatened by that type of presence. People feel uneasy with it. It breaks the phony flow. It doesn't comply with fabricated realities. They weren't prepared for your frequency back then. Not because you were mistaken, but because your truth exposed all they were feigning. They would have attempted to quiet you, reduce you, and label you. Everything has changed now. The world is worn out, dejected, and yearning for something real. And because of that shared need, there is now room for your voice, presence, and calling to be heard rather than dismissed. It was never intended for you to travel this route by yourself. There is more to the obsidian inner order than meets the eye. It is a haven for the awakened, the exiled, and those who have been abandoned for their truth and gaslight for their abilities. We get together live on Zoom once a week. Stories of change from real individuals with genuine faces. The psychic skills of a former CFO were accepted, a seer who liberated himself from religious tyranny, and a healer who discovered their ability after surviving ritual torture. We're joined by dozens of others who have been through precisely what you have. Your spiritual family is this group. I will never abandon you. I will never allow you to experience this revelation by yourself. I will never browse over your pain as if it were just content. You were not punished by being banished from the normal world. For us and the family that chose you back, it was a prelude to this. Join the inner order of Obsidians. In the description, there is a link. You aren't here to plead for favors. What the world didn't even realize it needed until now is what you're here to offer. You're not making a return. You're here now. The commotion subsides, and the curtain lifts. The filters are breaking. The performances are becoming old. And the only thing that still has real weight is your genuineness. Now that you have fully assimilated your trip into who you are, you take the stage not as someone who aspires to be chosen, but as someone who has always been chosen and is at last prepared to demonstrate to the world what that means. The universe is now prepared to see what it has been secretly constructing for years, not because you have arrived. The spotlight finds you because it was always intended to fulfill your purpose, not because you have earned it. The cheering starts not because you've won their admiration, but rather because life itself is commemorating the moment when one of its masterpieces is at last fully realized. Welcome, Selected One, to your show. The theater has been waiting. The crowd is ready. The scene is ready. And you are amazing, strong, and indisputable. You're just where you were supposed to be. When you carried precisely what the world had been lacking all along, you were always supposed to be there. The show starts right now, and it starts with